Let's stay overseas because the re-election of Taiwan's President Ma Yingjeou will be seen as, by many China watchers, as a sign of likely progress in relations between the two sides.
The return of the incumbent for a second term also has implications for other regional powers, including the US and, of course, Australia as well. Tom Switzer from Sydney's University's Centre for US Studies joins us now from Sydney. Tom, is this a case of the US breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief that the Taiwanese have re-elected the pro-Beijing President Ma?
I think you're right, Melissa. This will be greeted with a great deal of relief in not only Washington but also Beijing and indeed Canberra, as you alluded to. It's not just the fact that it's the fifth free and fair election we've seen in Taiwan since 1996 when one-party rule ended. It's the fact that the incumbent president, Mr Ma, who has championed a rapprochement with mainland China, has been re-elected. Admittedly, he didn't win by as large a margin as he did in 2008, but it's seen as a rebuke to the leader of the Democratic Progressive Party, the pro-independence party, that was championing a more pro-independence line. And, of course, anyone who's followed the nature of China-Taiwan US relations since Richard Nixon's visit, well, since Richard Nixon's visit in 1972, 40 years ago next month, but also since the Communist Revolution in 49, realises that this is one of the most precarious hotspots in the region.
So how does this result then fit in with what President Obama has said is his renewed focus on Asia? What does this result mean for that?
Well, I think it lessens dramatically the prospects of any kind of tensions between Washington and Beijing. Bear in mind, in 1996, around the time of the first democratic election in Taiwan, President Clinton and the Chinese leadership came to some skirmishes over the Taiwanese election. The Chinese lobbed missiles into the Taiwanese Straits to intimidate the Taiwanese, and they were fearing that the Taiwanese result would be a pro-independence position. The Americans, of course, ever since Richard Nixon went to China 40 years ago, have maintained a policy of strategic ambiguity. It recognises one China, but essentially the definition of one China comes down to the two parties involved. And any kind of severing of that delicate balance has a potential to blow out into some sort of tensions. So it's in Washington's interest to play it down. Of course, Washington also has a very close relationship with Taiwan. It has the Taiwan Relations Act that was set up in 1979 that guarantees America would always be there for Taiwan in the event of any kind of skirmish. But in terms of diplomatic relations, that won't change, and Washington is not keen to push the independence issue, nor indeed in many countries in the region, including Australia.
Well, that's what I was just going to come to, because surely this makes life a bit easier for Australia, given it's always had to balance being a strong ally of the US, which of course has its support for Taiwan should things go in the bad direction, but has closer relations with China than, say, the US, particularly when it comes to economic relations. So does that mean Australia now has an easier position to be sitting in diplomatically?
Well, indeed, Melissa. Australia has this very close security alliance with the United States since 1951. But of course, on the other hand, it has a very rapidly developing trade relationship with China. And so Australia is increasingly facing this prospect of, if you like, riding two horses simultaneously. But look, put things in historical context. Back in 2004, the then Foreign Minister Alexander Downer, seen as a very pro-US, hawkish foreign minister, answered a hypothetical question in Beijing when he said that in the event of a standoff between Beijing and Washington over the Taiwan Straits, the ANZUS Pact would not apply. And that generated a huge diplomatic firestorm in Washington, so much so that you had the then Shadow Foreign Minister Kevin Rudd attacking Alexander Downer from the right for not being pro-US enough. So, look, I think Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott will be glad that we won't have those kind of possibilities anytime soon.
It's certainly spared them a minefield, that's for sure. If I can just briefly ask you about domestically the situation in Taiwan internally. As you mentioned right at the start there, although it is a re-election of the incumbent, it's a significantly less of a vote than he received last time around. So does that suggest, although people are pleased enough with the direction he's heading in, that support for that kind of approach is waning, or is that more just a reflection of the generally difficult economic times that Taiwan's going through at the moment?
I suspect, Melissa, it's the latter. I think Taiwan has struggled economically, like a lot of countries, of course, as a result of the global financial crisis, particularly the Eurozone debt sovereignty crisis. And Taiwan, very much as an export-driven economy, it's the wealth income gap has increased in recent years. The unemployment has increased. House prices are steep. So I think it's overwhelmingly domestic issues. I think the problem for Mr. Ma, the president, was that he put a lot of emphasis on expanded trade and financial relations between Taiwan and the mainland. He signed a historic agreement 18 months ago with the hope that this would kickstart the Taiwanese economy. That really hasn't happened, and so the economy did really hurt Mr. Ma, but not enough for him to lose. He can claim some vindication for this, and the question now, of course, with relations to China is not just expanding economic relations, but it's also talking about more political integration, and that's really the hot button issue in Taiwanese politics and has been since '72.
And just finally on that, is there a chance that China would try and take this as an opportunity to get that closer integration and risk ramping things up, or do you think it's in everyone's benefit to step away from any escalation like that?
My sense is, specifically after this result yesterday, I think that cooler heads in Washington and Beijing and Taiwan will prevail, and they won't push the issue. The other thing to bear in mind is that we're in the process of changing leadership in China. This will not be an overwhelming priority in Beijing in the next few years.
Tom Switzer, thanks very much for taking us through it all.
Thanks, Melissa.
Tom Switzer from the US Studies Centre there.